Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs. This is Kate, your host and owner of 123 Limited. I found myself wondering recently about the differences between personality and character. Other questions followed. How much control do we have over each? Can I have a good character but a bad personality? What about the other way around? What does this mean for leaders? The clearest explanation I found states that character refers to our values and personality describes how we behave. So it's about beliefs versus actions, our inner and outer lives. I imagine that while some aspects of each are innate, others are learned or created over time. We can modify them. Additionally, beliefs influence behavior, so they are deeply connected. While this isn't the full answer to my wonderings, it does leave me with that one question. What does this mean for leaders? Because my guest shared the idea you can't outrun bad character with me when we first met, I thought this would be the right question to start our conversation. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, David. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to give you a moment to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. First off, I'm really excited to do this. I know we joked that it's a Friday for me, and so I always get excited to have great conversations on Friday. Brief introduction. I'll give you the Cliff Notes version. Everybody calls me Kitch or Coach Kitch. I think the only person left that calls me David is my mom when I'm in trouble, so I try and avoid that as much as possible.
Oh, that'd be like if you called me Catherine. I
Yeah,
understand.
yeah, exactly. I'm the founder and president of Edge Leadership Academy. Edge is a consulting firm. It's a small consulting firm aimed at arming people with the skills that it takes to be leaders. And so we work with organizations from all the way from small businesses to medium businesses, so all the way up to 800, 900 employees. And specifically, we work with the leaders of those organizations to come in and really understand what does it take to be a leader, and then how do we develop leaders within our team. So how do we attract leaders to our organization? How do we develop them once they're here? How do we retain those people? And then how do we make leadership development part of what we do on a daily basis? So we have our corporate side, which handles those entities. We have our athletic side, which is where I come from. Prior to Edge, I spent 10 years as a college strength and conditioning coach. So we still do a lot of work in the college sector. We still do a lot of work with student athletes, as well as the coaches, where we work with, doing coach to coach mentorships and workshops. And we also do a lot of hands-on work with the student athletes, teaching them to develop leadership skills and then transfer those into the real world. And then one-on-one, I do performance coaching with individuals, whether they be high-performing entrepreneurs, sales reps, etc., all the way to professional athletes, and even in some people in the medical field. And basically, my whole goal with that is I'm a psychology nerd. I'm finishing my PhD in psych now, and so that gives me an opportunity to really get in the weeds with people and talk about what it takes to be a high performer in life.
I think this is going to be a fabulous conversation. When I first saw your profile, simplifying performance, I was like, oh, that is right up my alley. So I'm really excited today to talk to you a little bit more in depth about character. And that first question is, what does character have to do with leadership? It seems pretty obvious, but I think it's a good place for us to start.
It is. It's the only place to start.
Right?
That's the thing, right? And that's what people don't understand. That we try and simplify, we try and bring to the table, is that it is the only place to start. When I was in college athletics, we had a phrase that we used to say to the student athletes all the time. We used to say, you can't out train a bad diet.
Mm-hmm.
And in leadership, character is the same thing. You can't outrun bad character. It shows up everywhere. And so when we talk about it from our perspective, I look at leadership and I break it down into what I call the 5 C's. So we have character, number 1, 2, consistency, 3, commitment, 4, creativity, and then 5 is communication. So when I present these things to people, I always put the 4 on the outside, and then in the middle is always the 5th C, which is character, right? I always have that because that's the starting point. It's the linchpin that holds all those things together. So when people ask me, how does my character show up in my leadership, or how does it affect leadership? It's your signature. It is your leadership signature. And people in today's world are craving authentic leadership. They want that room tilting magnetism that is leadership, and that comes from your character. It shows up in everything that you do, from your habits to your social interactions to your mindset to the way that you self regulate. All of those things are a reflection of your character.
So when you say room shifting or tilting,
Mhm.
great turn of phrase, by the way, it makes me think kind of automatically. My response to that is that character has to be big and bold. And I got to ask, what about quiet leadership? If it has
No,
a
yeah,
foundational, solid character, what about our quiet folks, our introverts?
100%. Some of the best leaders I've been around are introverts.
Okay.
It's Character is something that is, it's something we can sense as
Mm-hmm.
humans. It's something we can feel, right? Like you can feel it. And I always use kind of the example, it's kind of dark, but like if you watch the true crime documentaries and people talk about sitting across from somebody with poor character,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what do they always say? I could just feel it, or if you meet somebody for the first time and you know that they're going to end up being, you ever hear that term fast friends,
Yes.
right? You can feel it. You can feel character is something you can feel. And it's something that, again, it doesn't have to be big and bold. It doesn't have to be this overwhelming presence, right? Like some people are born with those presence or those personality traits, that that's kind of who they are. And then on the other side, you have leaders who are very soft spoken, but when they speak, it matters. And when they speak, you can trust it and you can feel that because their actions and the way they carry themselves is there. It's why we have that term quiet strength.
Character is compelling. And good character, like you said, it draws us in. We want more of that. And bad character repels that, which is a type of compulsion as well.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Um, Now, what about this interplay between character and personality? They kind of all get tossed around in our kind of our public language, if
Right.
you will. And I've been a student of personality for a long time, but they're different.
Mhm.
And there are the very academic ways to think about them, the scientific ways that go into psychology and even now into neuroscience. But what about in the day to day? How can we as lay people grasp the difference and be able to make those distinctions? Because I think it's really important for us to not always get wrapped up in somebody that has a great and sparkling personality. Because I do think it's possible for us to have a great personality and not the best character.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, to your point, people are going to think I'm like a dark guy by saying this, but there's a great book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and it's by Dr. Kevin Dutton, and he talks about how attractive the personality of a psychopath could be. Now, again, psychopaths fall on a spectrum, right? So we're not talking about just serial killers here. Like they can be neurosurgeons, they can be CEOs,
Mm-hmm.
they can be law enforcement. I mean, they're across the board, right? They show up in all different industries. But my point with that is that, yeah, personality can be this thing that kind of hooks us in. But once you get in there, you have to still be able to decipher someone's character. And to me, when I look at those things, I think about it in kind of two different ways. I think about personality as on a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and I think about character as a light switch. You either have it or you don't. It doesn't mean that you can't build it, but
Sure.
I would argue that most people fall in one of two buckets. I think it's a little bit more black and white. And so when I look at, as somebody, again, applying this on a day-to-day basis, I personally like to put people through little stress tests to see what their character looks like.
All right. Tell
So
me
for
more about
instance,
that.
yeah, so for instance, if I'm going to do a business deal with somebody and I'm just getting to know them, we're kind of in the beginning stages, I might ask them to go to dinner. And during that dinner conversation, there's a lot of boxes that I'm trying to check in my mind to see how their character is. So, first one is I'm going to ask them about their habits. Now, again, people are a little bit sometimes shy about that. They won't tell you. Nobody's going to come out and say, hey, one of my bad habits is that in the middle of the night, I sneak down to the fridge and I crush some Rocky Road ice cream while my significant other is sleeping, right? Like, nobody's going to come out and say that up front. But I want to bring those things out. So I want to find out a little bit about your habits because to me that's one of the biggest telltale signs of your character. because it tells me how you're spending your most valuable resource, which is your time. And so how do you spend that? Do you spend it in service of others? Do you spend it specifically on yourself? Do you have a balance? What is that, right? And that tells me a little bit about your impulse control. It tells me a little bit about your discipline, which are all things that fall to me within character, right? So I'm going to look at that.
Yes.
The second piece I'm going to look at is the social interaction piece. I like to see, how does somebody treat somebody that can do nothing for them? It's very easy to be polite and cordial to the CEO or to a potential business partner.
Yeah.
I want to see, how do you treat the doorman? How do you treat the Uber driver? How do you treat the waiter when they mess up your order? Right? Do you have empathy? And so there is an interplay between personality and character, but I think that ultimately your character comes out, and I want to see, how do you judge people on that, or how do you not judge people, but how do you treat people that can do nothing for you?
Mm-hmm.
And then on the flip side of that, right, I want to talk about your friends. I want to find out, like, who are the five people that you spend the most time with? What types of jobs do they have? What types of values? Because generally speaking, if I were to ask you about your best friend, within the first two or three sentences, you're going to tell me what values about that person you like and you care about, right? So you might say, "Oh, my best friend is Jen. She's an awesome teacher. She's a great mother," right? So right there, I know, okay, this person values service. They value, being in service of other people. They value being able to be a good mother. They value like family. So I'm getting a feel for your values, because that's why you
Mm-hmm.
keep that person around. So I'm going to ask those questions. Hey, what is that? Right? And sometimes people are a little quick to throw people under the bus, right? So if somebody around you is not high quality. So what might you say? Oh, well, my best friends are Joe, Jack, Jim, and Jeff. And Joe and Jack are great people. Jim is, this, that, and the other. But Jeff, sometimes we got to warn people about Jeff. And Jeff's a little off. He might say some off color things, or he might do some things like this, right? But he's our Jeff. And they always have an excuse for it. And to me, I'm like, oh, okay, so you're willing to compromise a little bit on what you tolerate around you.
Mm.
You're willing to keep someone in your circle that maybe you don't agree with. So that tells me that your character is a little negotiable. You have a little wiggle room, right? And I can see you thinking on that. Do you want to interject there?
I do. Thank you. Because I feel like
Mhm.
that feels very binary to me. And
Mhm.
what about lived experiences that can influence what we tolerate? What about things other than character or personality? And I know we're getting into these things that are so oddly knit together in
Mhm.
ourselves, that it can be hard to pull them apart, unweave them, if you will. But what if it's Jeff's hard to explain, maybe because he has mental health problems, or you're dealing with people that all came from like the same socioeconomic group, and Jeff is the outlier. And for whatever reason, right, wrong, or indifferent, these folks feel a need to explain him.
Mhm.
What are and I know for the sake of argument, we're talking in the simplest terms. And I feel like there has to be this understanding that there can be causes why people may not meet our expectations.
Yeah,
And I mean, that may
definitely.
be a character flaw of mine. That may be a character
No,
strength of mine.
no,
But I do. It's like, I
Mhm.
don't know that. Yes. I mean, our friends are a reflection of us. There
Mhm.
is that. And I don't know that friendships necessarily define character that distinctly.
I would argue that. I would argue that, and I say that simply coming from kind of the world of, and looking at the world from a high performance standpoint.
Okay. Okay.
I look at things, so it does kind of become, to your point about being binary, it does become zeros and ones.
Yeah.
Like it really does. Things do become very black and white, and I've noticed the further I've dug into both the psychology side and also like the actual like sociocultural side and actual like social dynamics of it, I have found that really high performing people are pretty binary in nature. So when
Interesting.
they're evaluating others, they are looking at people as either pluses or minuses.
Mm.
And Now, do I think that that's the end all be all? Absolutely not. I think, to your point, right? I think the best answer in the world is it depends. I
Yes.
mean, that's my answer to a lot of things in this world, right? I don't
Everything.
think
It's
there
my
are many.
favorite answer.
Yeah,
Yes.
there's very few things in this world that are black and white.
Hmm.
And I think so you have to be able to take all of that with a grain of salt. So even this evaluation in this hypothetical situation that I'm talking about, you have to remember also, as somebody listening to this, that information is still going to be filtered through your perception of it.
Yeah.
And so you still, to somebody else, they may look at that and say, hey, this is exactly the kind of person I want to be around. They show these tendencies. So, for example, I'm a highly competitive person, highly, highly competitive. I am the king of ruining family game nights because I do not lose well. And so for me, when I see that in somebody else, that's attractive to me. Like I'm
Okay.
like, oh, I want to be around that person. Versus for somebody else, they might see that competitive streak in me or in other people, and that may be a turnoff.
Hmm.
And they may be like, hey, that's not somebody that I want to surround myself. So I do think that you have to understand that it is somewhat subjective. I don't think there's an objective way to measure character. I think,
Okay.
obviously there's moral standards and social norms, right?
Yeah.
But I think within that, you have to figure out from your perspective what makes sense, right? And I think, again, you have to look at the different areas of your life as well. Like some of the friends that I may have outside of business, I may value different things about them than the friends that I have inside business. But if I told you my whole friend group, my five, there would be a pretty accurate representation of that entire spectrum
Okay.
of my value system,
Yeah.
right? Does that kind of
Oh,
bring
it
that
makes
full
total
circle a little
sense.
bit?
It makes
Yeah,
total sense. And
I
some of this is just for the sake of argument.
for
The
sure,
what about this?
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
you know, we've been around this question, but I want to ask it very explicitly.
Hmm.
If character is values or beliefs, something I said in my introduction is that belief influences behavior. So, kind of, what are your thoughts? How does that characterological element come into the way we show up in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, right, about behavior and beliefs, because what the research has actually shown is that it's a bidirectional relationship, meaning that behaviors influence beliefs just as much as beliefs influence behaviors. Um, that
Interesting.
being
I can see
said,
that.
I think it's important to kind of play the film out to the end, so to say, and play the tape out and understand as well that the most foundational aspect of habit formation is your identity and your inner beliefs. And they've proven that through multiple research studies. So if you have somebody, for instance, they said they brought a group of people that were considered overweight, and
Hmm.
they showed them a picture of a flower and a picture of garbage, and it was a binary option, one or two, and it said which most reflects you. And most of those people, which is really sad, they chose the garbage.
Mm.
And so that influences their behaviors, right? Because now they have this belief in their mind of that's who they are, right? And so that's why some of the new um, psychological and some of the new psychology work that's coming out on influencing identity and priming certain identities that are more positive, and the power that has, right? It's why people are drawn to motivational speakers, because it allows us to connect to a version of us that we aren't yet familiar with. It allows us to see a future that maybe we didn't see before, right? And so there's a lot that goes into the behavior and belief relationship. It's a really complex relationship. It's a really
Yeah.
interesting relationship. It's something that I'm working deeply on as I start to go down the rabbit hole of my PhD dissertation and understanding habit formation. But it's to me the two key elements, right? It's one, understanding the bidirectional nature, and then two, understanding that when you're looking at habit formation, most people assume if I have a goal I can build a habit, when that's actually not true. The limiting factor could potentially be the identity and the inner beliefs that you have. So even
Hmm.
if you look at people who do, again, we're using the physical thing just because it's the easiest and most kind of salient example of it, right? But if you look at somebody who loses a bunch of weight and all of a sudden they're really physically fit, and you ask them, what was the biggest change you had? Well, when they first started losing weight, their goal was maybe to lose 40 pounds, right? That was the goal. But then you ask them about it, what's been the biggest thing that's come out of this? And they're going to tell you the identity and the narrative, the internal narratives that they have, the identity shift.
Yeah.
And then that's the key, right? Is that ultimately we might set out for something with a goal as the reason, but the purpose of it actually becomes the identity shift and the beliefs and the identity formation that we have right throughout the way. And so that's the real power of it, of especially of habit formation, is that you can shift those internal narratives. You can literally, in a simplistic way, you can go out and win so often that you start to believe that you're a winner.
Yeah.
Because you do winning things, right? And that's what's really cool about it. It tells us that winning is a habit, in any realm.
I'm reminded of John Acuff's book Soundtracks right now, because he actually talks about one of his soundtracks. I'm always winning. That's a thought that he's planted in his own head to shift how he perceives his experiences, and it's brilliant. It works because I know from my own experience, and I know from talking with other people, it's not unique to me, that what I think about people impacts the way I treat them. And that includes
Absolutely.
myself.
Absolutely.
And, frankly, I'm not shy about this. I've had years of therapy to address that inner critic, that cruel voice. And anytime I'm able to take some of its power away, I treat myself better.
Absolutely.
I just do, because I'm not calling myself horrible names. I'm not thinking of myself as garbage. I just, it's so fascinating to think about how our thoughts about ourselves and the world have a part to play in our beliefs, in our values, our character. But then there's also this like public facing view of our habits and our behaviors and the way we kind of orient ourselves to the world through our personality. It's obviously not a question. I think this is such a fascinating topic.
Same. Obviously,
yes.
I love it. I mean, I could go down the rabbit hole in this all day. And to your point earlier, when you were talking about how you start to perceive someone, and then that changes how you show up for them and the opportunities that you give. So there's actually a psychology principle called the Pygmalion effect, which is how you perceive somebody, you're going to give them more opportunities to confirm that perception. So for instance, if I think Uncle Joe is a jerk, well, when Uncle Joe comes over for Thanksgiving dinner, I'm going to give him opportunities to act like a jerk.
Oh, yeah. And interpret everything as him being a jerk.
And interpret everything, correct. So what happens is it compounds, because you have the Pygmalion effect, which means I'm giving this person opportunities to confirm what I already think about them. And then it triggers a confirmation bias. So now I'm going to look for things that weren't necessarily a confirmation of what I perceive, but because I'm looking for it, they now become a confirmation of what I perceive. And so it turns into this real snowball effect. And the human brain and human psychology, if you really look at it, there's a lot of those interplaying, compounding type of things, which is why, to your point, our mindset and the way that we talk to ourselves and the way that we are able to observe our thoughts versus get caught up in them is so pivotal. And it's something, again, just piggybacking off of your thought, I've same years of therapy to work through this stuff and try and figure out, because I'm my own worst critic as well. And so what I found was, even though I was outwardly quote unquote successful, so if I'm successful by external metrics, internally, I never felt any of that success. I never identified with any of that. And so that, I realized, also showed up in the way that I showed up in my personal relationships. It also showed up in the way that I showed up in my professional relationships. I became transactional in certain areas of my life because I was trying to fill an internal wound with external, rewards. And it doesn't work that way. And what I was doing was triggering some of those compounding biases that I had towards myself, right, in order to uphold this outward facade that I had, which, again, to your point, right, we have this outward version of us, but then we have the one that's in our head at night when the lights are out and there's nobody else around. And to me, I think the real power in self-growth and self-development is understanding to orient that voice that happens at night when your head's on the pillow in a way that is in service of you rather than opposing you and rather than holding you back. And that takes the ability, before you can put the car in drive, you got to get it out of reverse. So you have to be able to get to neutral first. And that's where I think tools like meditation, and even some of the cognitive behavioral therapy and some of those tools, journaling, anything that allows you to kind of get your thoughts out for a second and observe them, I think is a really key aspect of being able to reverse some of those negative compounding effects that do happen, and we don't recognize them when they're happening. We just get caught up in it, and then next thing you know, you're there, and you're like, how did I get here, right?
Yeah, I am brutally familiar with all of that because it's so easy to get into this loop of self-criticism, or to the point of what we've been talking about, criticizing other people and turning it into this unpleasantness. You talked about confirmation bias. What do you think about the interplay between character and bias?
Yeah, I think to me, and again, this is completely subjective. This is completely my opinion based. But I for me personally, I think your ability to reserve judgment is a signal of your character as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think your ability to recognize people for people, right? And appreciate that people are in their process, right? Whether it's something from your childhood or a current relationship and you're in. I'm not saying make excuses for people, right?
Yeah.
But be able to remove some of the judgment of it and really appreciate and recognize, hey, this person is doing the best they can with the tools, the experiences, and the knowledge that they have. They're trying to figure it out just as much as I am. And so therefore, I'm not going to judge where they're at in their process, right? And what I found when I worked through that was my ability to kind of slow down some of those biases and kind of like minimize some of that. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right?
No.
I'm still very, again, to the point about me being competitive, I still get very biased with people. Like I don't like, and there I just said it. That's a very judgmental phrase, right?
Yes.
Like I don't like, and I caught
Yeah.
myself as soon as I said it, right? But I find myself having a reaction to people who look at things and say moral victories, or it's okay to come up short. Like to me, it's not. Like I'm a very binary person when it comes to that. I want to win. I don't believe in like we're neutral. And so
no
I
ties.
really have
no
to
ties.
I have to no ties. Yeah, I have to temper that because I get into that confirmation bias, and then that dictates how I treat a person or how I let a person in and towards me, right? Like I'm like, oh, I don't want that person around me because they might force me to look at they might force me to revalue my relationship with competition. And that would shake one of my core stories that I have. So I can't do that, right? But that's what we do as humans. We try and protect our values. It's why for those of you guys out there that are listening that are maybe doing really well or have come from a tough background and are trying to go into a new direction in your life, and you feel like people are judging you or people are unhappy about it, and you feel like maybe people from your hometown don't understand it. That's why, because you're challenging their beliefs, because they had this belief that we're from this certain shared experience, this certain shared background, shared childhood, shared geographical location, whatever it is. And now because you're out of it and you've moved on, I don't want to use the word above, but you've moved out of that environment. Now they don't have a reason to say, oh, I can't get out. Yeah. And so it really has nothing to do with you being successful or you working on your traumas or you becoming more emotionally intelligent or financially stable. It has nothing to do with you. It has to do with their emotional, and I don't want to use the word immaturity, but just they haven't grown to that point yet.
Well, it may not even be about growth. It can be about opportunity as well. And we do tend to filter everything through our understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely.
So even though in this example, it's all about the person who's doing something different, who maybe has moved and is doing something that was unexpected, it has nothing to do with me, but I compare it to myself.
Correct. You
And
self-reference.
yeah, and which is natural. Like people are not bad because they do that. We're wired to do it. It's interesting as we keep talking, like you talked about reserving judgment when we first discussed bias. And the best quote about bias I've ever heard is if you have a brain, you have bias.
Yeah,
it's the human condition.
Absolutely.
It's not whether or not you have it, it's what you do with that, which it's a kind of an amygdala response in some ways. The snap judgment, the processing of information instantaneously to keep ourselves safe. I think what character is the ability to manage your responses to the world.
Yes.
So that you show up in a way that frankly does no harm to yourself or others. And we can talk about it as beliefs, but it's, do I have the ability to self-regulate?
It becomes principles over preferences.
Yes.
That's the big,
love that.
When you can start to make decisions based on your principles rather than your momentary preferences.
Yeah.
And when you look at people who struggle to deal with success, struggle to deal with failure, struggle to deal with adversity, most of the time those struggles come from the fact that they can't differentiate and then make the appropriate decision between principles and preferences. Right. And those preferences manifest in their reactions to things rather than responding to things. And that's such a key difference. So one of the things that we teach a lot, and I work a lot with people on, is understanding that champions and great and successful people, they master the moment. That's what I say. So you have to win. Like there's a lot of sports cliches where people say win the day. And I say that's such garbage. It's not about winning days. It's about winning moments. Right? It's about that moment where you have that urge to do something and that's coming from your lower self. Can you choose to, in that moment, say, okay, I'm going to give up what I want now for what I want most, which is the growth and the forward trajectory that I'm on.
Are you familiar with the Stanford Marshmallow experiment?
Yes,
study?
Exactly.
Yes, 100%. The delayed gratification.
Absolutely. It's something that every successful person has. Something that every successful person has. And it's one of those things that I look at very closely when whether I'm choosing friends, business associates, romantic partners, whatever. I'm always looking for that ability to delay gratification, because I think, to me, it's a key character trait.
I would agree. And it's not necessarily like being cruel to yourself. It's
correct.
Am I able, not just willing, but able to wait? And can I judge that short-term pleasures don't always outweigh long-term rewards?
Yeah, and here's to take that a step further. When you get really good at it, it's not just can I wait, but how do you wait? Do you wait impatiently and start to compare and get caught up in comparison syndrome, right? And start shiny object syndrome. We're looking left, we're looking right, we're doing all those things. But can you wait in I want to use the phrase, I want to make sure I phrase it properly, because it's one of my mentors, Inky Johnson, says this. Oh man, obedient patience. Obedient patience, meaning you are committed to what's coming, and you're willing to sit in the patience and the discomfort of that momentary disconnect, right? And understand that this is temporary and this is part of that reward on the other side.
Yeah. A dear colleague of mine passed away recently after a battle with cancer. And during the funeral, her husband, in giving her eulogy, talked about how she made the best of that circumstance. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to be joyful in the face of this hardship. Right. She hated medical testing, which is funny because we worked in healthcare, right? But she hated being subjected to any sort of test. She signed up for every single test because she said there is a possibility that someone else will benefit from this illness that I have, if I participate in these studies.
Mm-hmm.
And that is obedient patience.
100%.
And
100%.
this woman is still, even after her passing, is a pillar of strong character in my life. So yeah, recognizing that even the hard things, never mind the stuff that we want and we're excited about, but we're willing to wait for, but even the hard things bring opportunities for us to do better and do good. That's the way to
and
be.
to speak even more highly of your colleague, can you be in service of others when it's inconvenient for you?
Mm-hmm.
Can you be in service of others when you want comfort, when you're seeking comfort? And that's, to me, is again another hallmark of that strong character, that ability to show up and serve, right? And I look at the example that I always use for this is my mother. So
Yeah.
when we were young, I came from a single parent household, never met my father. Stepfather was in and out of the picture, and I remember when we were just kids. I was probably 10, 11 years old. And we had to, during the summer, we had to help pack lunches at the Salvation Army to take to the Boys and Girls Club for the kids that didn't, they typically got free lunch at school, but because it was summertime, they didn't get it. And so we would be down there and we'd be helping make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and packing brown paper bags, me and my brother. And my mom would always say to me, "Hey, when you're done, follow the truck on your bike. And when you get to the Boys and Girls Club, get your brother and you a bag." And I always thought it was like a reward for helping. Like I was like, "Oh, cool! I get a free. If I help, I get a sandwich."
I get to
And
race the truck and I get a peanut butter and jelly
yeah,
sandwich.
this is great, right? But what I came to find out is we were those kids. We were the family
Mm.
that needed help. But my mom believed in leading with love. And so the harder things got, the more she tried to serve other people. When she was going through her divorce and she was struggling and coming out of an abusive relationship, she would go and spend, she was already working two jobs and raising two kids, but she would go and spend her weekends at domestic violence shelters,
Mm.
helping others. And it's like, though, that to me is character, right? Like your ability to find opportunities to serve others. And I talk all the time about gratitude in practice. Like one of the
Yes.
big things that people like to talk about is their gratitude journals, and I have a gratitude practice and this, that, and the other. Put gratitude in practice means action,
Yes.
right? And I know that sometimes that ruffles feathers where I say it's okay to start with a gratitude journal. That's a great place to start,
It is a good
but it can't
thing.
be the end all be all.
Yeah.
You then have to show that gratitude by being in service, doing things for others, maximizing your opportunities. Like, to me, that's gratitude in practice. If you're truly grateful for what you have, then go share your light with the world, right?
Yeah. I I like to imagine gratitude in this case, but also, similar feelings, traits as something that we can only hold so much of. We're not made to have infinite gratitude, and it has to come out as care and keeping of others. I think I've had this mental picture of an overflowing cup,
Mm-hmm.
and it's our
Yeah,
responsibility, to give that back out to the world. I really like thinking about the ability to serve others as a character quality, or the quality of someone's character in this conversation around leadership, because that tells us then that anyone can lead, that you can lead without a title as you are serving other people.
yeah. Oh, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
If you can understand the role that service plays in leadership, you
Mm-hmm.
are more than qualified to be a leader. And
Yeah.
it's so interesting because that's why some of the best leaders never set out to be a leader. They just
Right.
wanted to serve others. And they
Yeah.
ultimately ended up in leadership roles, right? And it's also the reason why people who struggle when they reach the top of an organization or an organizational chart, it's because they stopped serving others and they started to serve
Yes.
their own means, right? And so it's, yeah, service is the key of it all. It's and again, I think, to me, service is a reflection of the quality of your character.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I would agree. I'm trying to corral my thoughts for a moment. Um, one of the questions I prepared that I think fits in logically here is this idea of when I encounter someone where their personality and their character, or essentially what they say and what they do,
Mm-hmm.
when those are not aligned in the workplace, if I'm leading somebody who their walk and their talk, if you'll pardon the cliche, are highly misaligned and it's having an impact on their work, on their performance, the question is not, do I do this or not? You're leading that person.
Right? Correct.
And I think the thing that's so important that a lot of leaders end up doing is going to character, because it is kind of a bigger important thing. But again, they're making assumptions. There are biases there. Where in a leadership role, your responsibility is to stay focused on the behaviors, the demonstrable things, and the business impact.
I hear you, and I'm going to play a little bit of devil's
Love
advocate
it. Bring
here.
it. Bring it.
Yeah, I think your primary role as a leader is a mentor and an educator, first and foremost. I understand absolutely that in the business world, there's bottom lines, there's KPIs, there's things that we have to meet. There's no doubt. But to me, your commitment has to be to the people, the vision, and the culture first. If you don't have those things, the results will never show. I mean, there's countless research articles that support that. And so I think it's to your point about the character, you have to address it, but you have to find a way to address it. And this is where it falls back on you as a leader. Have I created an environment where I can have these types of conversations with people? And you should.
So we're not saying different things, to be clear.
Okay,
I think we're just using wildly different language because, in fact, I want to go back to the leading with love. I think that type of, I'm going to focus on what I see and the impact that it has within the scope of my responsibility, your job performance. I think that's an act of love. I've encountered a lot of people that they jump from, I'm not getting the results I need from this person, to they're a bad actor, they have bad character, or they just have bad feelings about someone and they treat someone poorly because they're not addressing the thing that is actually their responsibility, and that's that person's behavior. And it has to be done in a way that is loving, is kind, sometimes a bit mentoring, sometimes a bit teaching as well. But the act of setting clear expectations gives you this solid foundation for any future performance conversation. So I may be experiencing that Joe, or was it Jeff that was our problem in the friend group?
I think it was Jeff.
Yeah.
So Jeff's a problem at work too, huh?
Right? He is. I mean, we got to explain Jeff. So sorry, every Jeff I've ever known. But, Jeff is, he's always putting on a good show. Everybody loves him. He's the class clown, but I'm not getting the results I want. And I think it's because he's lazy. Too many times I think leaders go to lazy. They don't go to Jeff. You spend your time talking with your colleagues. Your results are late. You've missed 7 deadlines in the last 2 weeks. And I think that a leader with strong leadership character gets very clear and actually gets kind of black and white. Of course, they have a responsibility for that bottom line, but they're doing this out of a way to demonstrate love for the person, because the end goal is actually to get them performing great, not just because you all have a job to do, but because you want the best for that person. And that includes them being their best self.
Correct. And I would agree with that. So I think you brought that full circle for me. So I understand now. We were saying the same thing. Yes.
Yeah.
So to your point, yeah, I think great leaders, and this is where you'll see the ability to be creative, right? I think great leaders understand that we need to be having three different types of conversations with our employees. We need to be having evaluative meetings, which are those KPI meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to be having coaching meetings, which is where we address, hey, your performance is lacking in these areas. These are the things we need to do better. And then we have a mentoring meeting as well that should be addressing and putting to rest, some of the idea of Jeff is lazy. So in those
Mm-hmm.
mentoring meetings, we're showing Jeff the way. We're giving Jeff
Yeah.
our productivity skills. We're giving Jeff our productivity tools, right? In the coaching meeting, we're talking to Jeff about specifically how do we improve your performance, right? And then in the evaluative meeting, we're saying, hey, here's the data.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's drive off of this, right? So I think you have to be having a mix of all three, and not all three have to be structured on the calendar one-to-one time, right? But they should be occurring and they should be happening regularly. And to your point about the expectations, yes, absolutely. I mean, you look at any high performing organization, clear expectations is a foundation. It's a non-negotiable.
Thank you.
And we operate from the in our company, and anybody in my team, we call it the 10x rule. So if something is important to you, it needs to be repeated 10 times in 10 different ways, because 10 different people might have to hear it 10 different ways for it to be clear to them. And so we go by the 10x rule, but we don't leave staff meetings without we call it the 10x debrief. Does anybody have any questions on things that we repeated multiple times?
Love it.
Is everybody clear? And then the last question from you as a leader should be, what resources do we need from me to get this done on time? Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you need from me? Right. And then that's their opportunity to come out and say those things. So again, I think a lot of that work in the situation, the hypothetical that we're playing with, a lot of that work should have been done on the front end that allows for these conversations to occur when we see that performance dip. Yeah. And the other thing is, as a leader, are you confident enough in your skill set to step in early? And I'm not saying being a micromanager, but not allow it to get to a point where now you have a judgment formed about Jeff. Because it takes time to assign somebody the label of lazy, right? Which means you've probably seen these dipping numbers for a while. So why have they not been addressed yet, right? And that comes back to you as a leader. So I think there's a lot of layers going on that to navigate that specific situation.
Mm-hmm. I like the 3 conversations model that you talked about. I've taken a slightly modified approach to that, which does happen primarily in formal scheduled meetings, and just putting it out there as here's another way to do essentially the same thing. Find what works for you, leader.
Yeah, find what works.
But 2 meetings a month with your direct reports, one about the work, one about the person.
Love that.
The updates, the what barriers do you need removed, and then the other is let's talk about your aspirations, your development opportunities. And obviously, there can be a lot of flow in between those. They can interplay with each other. They both give you opportunities to provide that direct feedback. And then if you're having any issues, we'll say issues instead of problems here, that's when you bring in that additional what you call a coaching conversation in your mental frame. And I think about performance feedback. This is for performance improvement. And of course, people are not restricted to just meeting with their boss twice a month. It can be more depending on the circumstances and the needs. But being really clear that part of my work as your leader, as your direct manager, is to focus on the work and focus on you. We talked about non-negotiable in terms of expectations a moment ago. What about the nature of a leader's character? Do you think that there are any non-negotiables when it comes to leadership?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
That's
a tough one. I'm trying to think of the best way to even attack this question, because I want to say yes, but I know the answer is no, and I also know that the answer is it depends.
Mm-hmm. It's all three, actually, isn't it?
Yeah,
interesting.
It's all 3, right? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say that there's non-negotiables as far as defining it. I think that transparency and honesty would probably be on that list if I were to say that there were non-negotiables. I think it's extremely, extremely hard, if not impossible, to overcome falsities and to overcome
Agreed.
lies.
Yeah.
I just think that that is one of those things that will bury you before you even get out of the gates.
I think are some non-negotiables. I don't think there are lots of them. And
Right.
there's a certain like depends around them, kind of a halo of circumstance. But I do think honesty is one. Honesty doesn't mean I tell you absolutely everything I know, though. It means I don't lie to you willfully or keep information from you that you need to have in order to work. If
That's
I
the key. Yeah,
if I
that's the
have an
key. What you just said at the
NDA,
end.
if I have an NDA, that's not being dishonest. That's actually being honest and ethical and practicing integrity. So,
Again, and that's where
yeah,
I think, yeah, we're speaking the same
we
language.
are.
We're saying yes, no, it depends, because
Yeah,
the halo exists. But
exactly.
so let's just play in the realm now that we've established the context of, hey, these are situational. There's
Yeah,
layers to it, right? I
yeah.
think, to your point, those non-negotiables would be honesty.
Hmm.
Those non-negotiables will be accountability, your ability to understand, like, hey, I'm willing to be held accountable as well, is what I'm saying. Not
Okay,
so much, yeah, yeah,
perfect,
yeah.
perfect.
So I'm
Because that
willing to
was
be
going to
held
be my
accountable.
my counterpoint. It has to
Right,
be
yeah, no,
my
yeah, yeah.
accountability as the leader.
No,
Okay.
you have to say, I
Hmm.
want to be held accountable.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
the next one I would say is attention to results.
Okay.
I think there has to be some level of attention to results. There
Do
has to be.
Is that really a character quality?
I think so. I would argue yes.
Give me your
Because and
argument then. I want to
so my
understand that a
my
little
thought
more.
process, yeah, no, my thought process behind attention to results will be, those things are going to drive habit formation, and those things are going to drive where you're orienting yourself towards. So for instance, my personal vision statement as a man is to leave a legacy for my family to be proud of, right?
Yeah.
So within that, I have KPIs. I have actual performance things that I look at
Okay.
that drives my habit formation, right? So I have to have attention to those results in order to drive habits in that direction. So it doesn't necessarily have to be attention to results for the business, but it has to be attention to results for your vision, whatever that vision is. Right. So I guess that's kind of a muddy way of saying it. I hope you're following what I'm picking up
I
what I'm
th-
putting down
I
there.
think I am. I got distracted for a second. We've used the term KPIs a couple of times, and I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
assume everybody knows what that is.
Oh, so
It's
key
key
performance
performance
indicators.
indicators. Yeah.
Yep.
It's here's how
Yeah.
I know the work is getting done. I I think this is another case where you and I are talking about the same thing but different. I would not call it attention to results. I would think of it as um and I'm going to be just as muddy now. It's doing what I say I'll do, that I complete the work that I commit to. And that can be as an individual, or it can be if I commit my team to this work, we will complete it.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And 100%. Yep. Speaking the same thing. To me, I use the term KPI, and I can tell you kind of why. One of my catchphrases, so to say, as a keynote speaker and as a workshop facilitator, is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it.
Yep.
And
That
so
is
so that's why I always go back to a KPI, because I'm like, I'm gonna put a number on this. Like I'm going to put a score on this. So for instance, I have a 360 audit that I do of myself every 6 months, and I have a
okay.
full one that I do every year, which audits my personal habits. It audits my relationships and what I'm bringing to the table, what I'm getting out of them from other people. It audits my physical health, so sleep, nutrition, physical fitness, all those things, my personal development, my business development, financial goals, all that stuff is in this audit. And again, this is a personal preference. I needed that scoreboard, and this may be the
Hmm.
competitiveness in me coming
Oh,
out.
it is. It's
I
not
needed
maybe.
the
It is.
scoreboard. I needed the scoreboard for me to really be able to pinpoint it. And so I like that, because then I can look at the data points over the years. So I can say,
Mm.
okay, I had a great year this year from a relationship standpoint, from a business standpoint, but my physical health went down the pooper, right? And then I look at the next year and I say, okay, my business struggled a little bit, but my health got better. but this thing's got better. So I can develop trends over time, and I can start to really pinpoint what inputs are giving me what outputs.
Okay.
And to me, that's where I say the attention to results piece. Like that's why I like the KPI idea of it. So again, it's my competitive nature. So this is it's a great segue though for us to highlight again, right? Every single thing is filtered through your personal perspective and your personal experiences.
Yeah. You want a scorecard. I want a report card. So
Right.
I understand. Like, I want the A. Give me the 4.0.
Yeah, I'm like, no, let's talk about the numbers and let's see, because I had a coach early in my career that he said to me, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. And now again, wildly oversimplified because you can lie with numbers very easily, and there's a lot of people making a lot of money doing it.
Oh my goodness.
But,
that's a whole other discussion there, kid.
Yeah, but it's something that I always kind of held on to, that it's like you can have your own opinions on things, but you can't have your own facts and figures.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if I look at these numbers and I see certain things in my life, I can't complain, blame, or defend.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to look in the mirror and say, where do I need to get better? And I like simplicity. I love simplicity.
You know, that term, I can't complain, blame, or defend. That is such a beautiful capsule of strong character in and of itself.
Absolutely.
That I may not like the circumstance, but I'm not going to make a lot of noise about it. I am going to take responsibility for myself and not point fingers. I am not going to try to make excuses for what I've done or not done. And that self-regulation of here's how I'm going to show up. That's actually why I think having a conversation about character on a podcast about leading and learning is so important. Because at the end of the day, it's about how do you show up? Yeah, and absolutely. Leaders need to ask themselves that all the time, whether they're doing a self 360 every 6 months, whether they're looking themselves in the mirror every morning, whether they're doing a journal. How am I showing up?
For sure. And making sure that that's aligned with how you want to show up.
Yes.
Because sometimes we just go through autopilot. And I know the day you wake up every day and we have great intentions. Mm-hmm. The majority of leaders wake up every day and they have great intentions. And then life happens.
Yep.
And leadership happens. And leadership is messy. And the people business is messy. And business itself is messy. And so you go through your day and all of a sudden you get kicked off of course and you're not showing up the way you want to and you don't even realize it. And then you get to the end of the day and you're like, I'm so tired that I'm not even going to take a second and reflect on today. I'm just going to go to bed so I can wake up and do it again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the unsung truth of leadership is the ability to, even when you're exhausted, sit down and say, how well did I show up compared to how I wanted to show up? And you know, to kind of go back to an earlier point, do that with non-judgment. Do that with an idea of I'm not going to attach my self-worth. I am not a loser because I had a bad day. However, I still need to learn from this. And now tomorrow I can be better, right? And it can inform your decisions moving forward on how you handle things. It also can inform from a business standpoint. Maybe you're a tactician listening to this and you're like, hey, I'm sick of the touchy-feely stuff. Then listen, it can impact from a tactical standpoint, the way you attack your day. If you look at that and you say, hey, I wasn't able to show up for this block of one-on-ones that I had, then look at your calendar and say, what did you have before those one-on-ones that put you in a place where you were going into those biases, or you were shutting down, or you were getting into the ego trap, or whatever it was that tripped you up during those one-on-ones? What happened before that you weren't in the right frame of mind? And then what do you need to perform in that right frame of mind? So now you know for the next time you have those blocks of one-on-ones, hey, listen, I need a 20-minute buffer before my morning meetings or after my morning meetings before I go into my one-on-one time, because I got to clear my mental palate. I got to slow down for a second.
I think what we're talking about here is it is a character aspect of great leadership. It's the willingness to eat your own cooking, if you will, whether it's emotional connection or objective tactics. I'm going to apply how I lead my people to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, if it doesn't feel good to me, I'm guessing it feels really bad to them. But the goal is to be consistent there, which is one of your C's.
That's how we run our business here, with Edge. I believe in leading from the front. I believe in, we have to be practicing what we're preaching, and it has to be authentic and it has to be real. And so we have these talks, we have these conversations, because that then gives me information as a leader to inform those three different types of conversations that I'm trying to have: those coaching, those mentoring, those evaluative meetings. I think for us, it's so important, because so much of what we teach is this character piece and is this understanding of that. And if we're going in and working on team cultures, we need to have it right ourselves.
It's important too to acknowledge that none of this is about perfection. In fact,
not at all.
The struggle, if you will, to be a person of character, it does mean acknowledging when you fall short. Not if, but when.
When.
So I will do the work because I want to show up well. I want to get the feedback that will help me be better, because I know that I am not my best every day.
I think you're 100% right. And I think the ability to be vulnerable sets the tone, right? And that's part of character. Part of character is understanding that character is forged not in 75 and sunny. Like, that's not where character is built. Character is built by going through the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And so many leaders want to use the word relatable. They want to be relatable to their people. Well, be a human. And part of being human, part of the human experience is being respectful of the human experience.
Yeah.
And being able to say that we go through it as well, right? Even things like, therapy, right? Like, I'm openly a huge mental health advocate. I went through some dark days. We all have. It is what it is. But I'm so open and honest with my team about that I put it on my work calendar, knowing that they can see my work calendar. Like, it says, hey, this is this. But to your point about being who I say I am, right? All of those things in my life that are non-negotiable, like that are helping me be my best self so I can show up for my team, are in a specific color, so that they see that my time allocation reflects how important this is to me, right? And how important it is to us as a team.
We've talked about how messy so much of this work is. I just used the word struggle a few moments ago. And what this conversation about vulnerability and authenticity has led me to think is that the easy part is to be yourself. It's all you have, right? You are the instrument of the work. Whether you are a business owner, a leader, a frontline employee, you are what you have. And if you can go through the work of accepting that, if you can build the identity around your true self, it's a solid platform to then do that harder work of self-control, self-regulation, serving others.
It frees you up.
Yeah.
It removes the fear.
Yeah.
It removes the fear. That's the biggest thing that it did for me. And I can only speak from experience, but it removes the fear. I don't have to remember what mask to wear. Yeah. And when you don't have to remember what mask to wear, I'm now free to try things. And I'm now free to admit that I came up short. And I'm now free to seek help and ask questions. And I'm now free to go out in the world as me and take the feedback that the world is giving me. And then I can improve upon that. And I can show up as a better me. And I can take the feedback from that, right? But if you never do that work of taking the mask off, we're not judging. The world is not giving you accurate feedback, because it's giving you the feedback based on the facade that you put forward. Exactly. Versus based on who you actually are.
Somebody I'm connected to on LinkedIn, and who's actually been a podcast guest before, Erin, she posted today a picture of herself in high school talking about what's the advice you would give your high school self. And for me, it was, don't wait so long to just be yourself.
Oh, same.
I don't know that I can say for myself that it's taken away the fear. What it has done is giving me more freedom because I'm not bound to the mask. I'm not spending all of this time and energy trying to figure out what version should I be.
Mm-hmm.
How can I fit myself into this? No, I'm Kate. That's all I have. Why do different?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And to your point about the simplicity, and I think that's really what it is it makes things more simple.
Right.
It just it's not complex anymore. It's not
Mm-hmm.
it's not complicated. Every day is not a million different layers. You're able to, like, I'm at the point now for me where I have this vision, this mission, and this set of values that to me are non-negotiable in my life. They help me form my character because everything is filtered through those. So every decision that I make, every conversation that I have is filtered through those things. And it also keeps me from being my own worst enemy because I don't have to overthink things anymore.
Yeah.
I just filter it through that. And as
Mm-hmm.
long as it aligns with my vision, my mission, and my values, it's going to help
Mm-hmm.
support the forging of my character. And it's going to allow me to show up the way I want to show up.
One of the things that I think we've talked around a lot, but just to get a little more definitive about, is how to go about building character. Another way to ask this is, how can habit be leveraged for character's sake? I would say start with is self-acceptance.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot that goes into that. But if you start with that first piece of work of becoming very aware of how you are, who you are, the way you show up on a daily basis, the impact you have on others, and, kind of audit yourself like you talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and accept it, and then determine from that point, what might I want to change? And that gets then into the habits and the things that we talked about, like being honest. I would add empathetic, accountable.
I think you're 100% spot on. I think it starts with accepting and knowing where you're at and then knowing where you want to go. And so being able to be honest with yourself about what that identity is that you currently have, what the values and beliefs that you currently hold are,
Mm-hmm.
and then how do you want to show up? Who do you want to become? And then from there, it's setting up an environment that makes it hard to fail. And a lot of people think it's this like really hard thing that you have to do, like you have to jump with no parachute. That's the exact opposite. You should put all the guardrails in place that you need, right, to help you build character and make the right choice the easy choice. So how do you start to do that? Well, you start to use some of these tools that people use from an identity standpoint to start opening some of those pathways neurologically to, hey, this is who I'm becoming, right? Which are things like linking, right? So can I link a desired habit to an existing habit that I already have?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is priming. Take advantage of identity priming. So surround yourself with little reminders of who you want to be. Reminders, I mean, they sound silly, but it's a way to hack your brain. So you have to use some of these tools. Use your brain to your advantage. Instead of having it work against you, use these things to put you in the right frame of mind. Use these things to put you in the right direction, and remove the friction, right? So if you want to read more, put a book somewhere that you're going to see it, right? So, and I'm talking about all these things that are, foundational things to be able to start to build the habits. But from there, you have to be willing to go through the hard things.
Yeah.
This beginning stage, because all this linking and the identity stuff, it's all great, but at some point you have to reinforce the identity with action. If you don't ever reinforce it with action, it doesn't ever become real. Be honest with yourself about that and say, I have to take action,
Mm-hmm.
right? No, action doesn't have to be this huge thing. It can be a small action, right? And I talk about taking messy action. Like
Yes.
when you're quote unquote motivated, when you're feeling it, you're like, okay, I want to do this thing. And then what does everybody do? I'll start Monday. No, do something right now. Do something right now. Whatever that little thing is, I don't care what it is, just do something. When it comes to building character, if somebody were to make a list of, hey, what are the things that I need to practice in order to build my character? I think we just hammered to death, habits and those things. But it's also, to me, it's honesty, it's responsibility, it's persistence, right? You have to your point about delayed gratification, right? It's also delayed gratification while working. It's also being able to move dirt on a daily basis. I think that's really important, right? And then optimism, and I don't mean like sunshine and butterflies,
No.
but can you create an environment of, I say, no L's, only lessons, right? So no losses, only lessons. Can you create, that's optimism to me. Like, can I look at things as an opportunity?
I think it's important to talk about optimism very clearly because it can be that cockeyed optimist where everything
Yeah,
is
and that doesn't
sunshine and
help
gummy
anybody.
bears. And optimism in this context is I have confidence that I can impact my surroundings, my present and my
Correct.
future. And
Yes,
I am
yes. And
optimistic about my ability, my team's ability to get things done.
then I have two more I would probably put on that list. I would say confidence.
Hmm.
When I say confidence, there's two key points to highlight here. One, people say all the time, I'm not a confident person. How do I build confidence? Confidence comes from having an undeniable stack of evidence behind you that you are who you say you are. So if you want to become more confident, keep promises to yourself. So that goes back to all the things that we talked about habits, things like that, right? So I would say I would put confidence in there. The second piece about confidence that I would add, these little asterisks, would be, to me, confidence to be yourself leads to the vulnerability, which leads to trust. So not only do you trust yourself, but other people trust you, right? So I think that's really what I'm talking about with confidence. So I don't want people to get misconstrued because, again, like optimism, it gets this like lollipop definition,
Well,
right?
there's a difference between confidence and arrogance. A
Correct.
lot of times they get conflated with each other. The footnote I would add to confidence, to your point about having the data, having the mountain of data, listen to the people that love you.
Absolutely.
Listen to what the
Absolutely.
people around you that you love and respect, that you like or you hold in esteem, what do they tell you about you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We ignore that a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. I think the last one I would add to that list, it's gonna be a catch-all. And I don't want people to get overwhelmed by it, but spend time on the soft skills. And I hate calling them soft skills because they're not.
They're real skills, human skills.
Empathy, right? Like your ability to be an empathetic listener, your ability to help people get through decision making and change management. Like those are all quote unquote soft skills, but there's nothing soft about them. Like leadership is a contact sport. I say that all the time.
Yes.
Leadership is a contact sport. You got to wear a helmet. And these soft skills will give you the ability to navigate that field.
I'm going to add one to your list. Grace.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good one.
Grace for yourself and grace toward others. No surprise, that's
Definitely.
one of my personal values. That's
No, I
why
love
I
that.
prioritize it here, that we have to demonstrate understanding of our own fallibility. And if we are trying to change and grow, if we've decided I can be better, recognize that you're going to make mistakes. Learn from them, forgive yourself, grieve if you have to, and then move on. Because otherwise, you end up just punishing yourself.
Right.
And that's cruelty. That's not character.
Yeah. Oh, that's a. I'll be stealing that. You'll be
Okay.
hearing that on stage. That's cruelty, not character. Wow. That's what we call that? We call that a bar. That's a bar.
Nice. Thank you. You have to attribute it to me the first time.
Oh, 100%. You'll get your royalty check. Don't you worry. Don't you worry.
We are definitely at time, and I want to be respectful for your finish Friday.
Thank you.
What are some last thoughts you have? And I would love if there are any specific resources that you'd want to direct
Mhm.
us to, if you could share those.
Yeah, absolutely. Your character will be the thing that will allow you to sustain that fulfilled success that we're all chasing. And I can't emphasize that enough. So to the leaders out there, please, 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 it's not gummy bears and jokes and teddy bears and stuff. This stuff is hard and it requires all of you, but it is so worth it. And the people around you will thank you, and our world needs it. So
Mm-hmm.
those would be my final thoughts. If you're not sure where to start, some of my favorite books when it comes to the character piece, the whole Ryan Holiday series. So The Obstacle is the Way, Stillness is the Key, Courage is Calling, and Discipline is Destiny. All four of those books, Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I recommend that book all the time because it's a low-hanging fruit for people to improve on a really important skill. So those will be my final thoughts, and I always leave people with the reminder that leaders are built, not born. You don't have to be born into this. You can build yourself into it. Just do the work.
It's hard work. It's entirely worth it. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it can't be fun.
Correct. Oh, it's great. Every day's fun.
Right. Yeah. This has been remarkably fun. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I had a blast. I love having these conversations, and thank you for building this platform. Thank you for doing this and putting this out into the world, because it's something that we need. So I'm sure there's a lot of leaders out there that are grateful.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.